You're listening to Straight from the Drafts. I'm your host Nao, social media strategist, business cheerleader and chronic oversharer. In this weekly voice note from me, you can expect actionable insights and behind the scenes stories, my best tips and all the encouragement, all with the goal of helping you plan your content with confidence so that you can turn your goals into reality with the support from your social media. So grab a drink, pop in your headphones and let's get into this week's episode. Hello, how's your week going so far? I hope you're having a good one. In the last week, my niece turned 1, which I can't quite believe. And if you don't know, my niece is my favourite little human. So that's a bit of a crazy milestone over here. I don't know where the last 12 months have gone. But I promise, despite me feeling all emotional about her birthday, that's not what today's episode is about. And what I actually want to chat about today is what is the difference between a social media manager and a social media strategist, and what it's like to work with either a social media manager or a strategist. And I think those words might be used I might be changing those words interchangeably. That's not a sentence. I'll be using those words interchangeably throughout this episode. There we go. But before we dive into all that, let's answer today's DM dilemma. Today's message says, I hear stories are the best place for sales. How do I get my views up and sell? Okay, so there is a reason that you're hearing that, because stories are almost exclusively, they get watched by your followers. So whereas other content might get pushed out to the explore feed and people who don't already follow you, stories are watched by your audience. Stories also generally take a bit more time to watch or read through compared to scrolling on reels and scanning through captions. So people watching your stories not only made the decision to follow you, but then also make the decision to watch your story content. The stories that you watch most often and the people that you engage with more will appear earlier in the list as well. So the first few circles that you see when you open up Instagram and there's the story circles at the top of your screen, those first few are usually your favorites, right? So if someone is seeing all of your stories, that's probably because you are in the very early few circles. So it's very intentional. They're there by choice. And all of this to say that these people are then therefore really interested in you and what you've got to say. So yes, stories can be really powerful for sales because they are essentially where your biggest fans hang out. And that's not to say that grid content can't be used for sales, but that is why stories can have stronger conversions and have that reputation as being the best place for sales. And you also asked how to get your views up. So there's a few things that you can do. Story resets being one. This is one of the only sort of hacks that I actually really back. I don't think that this is something that you should rely on necessarily long term, but if you're trying to use your stories more and you want to train your audience and Instagram to pay more attention to your stories, then this can be helpful. So what I mean by this is letting your stories expire. And then when you do go to post again, try a singular story slide that's super engaging. So adding a poll, a sticker, or just talking about a topic that you always know will get a lot of replies. Maybe that is your dog or your child. Things that are maybe a bit more personal that tend to get replies. Actually, I say more personal, but sometimes it's as silly as talking about people's favourite lunches. People love to talk about food. The second thing that I would say, and again, this is just kind of while you're retraining the story algorithm, don't spam your stories too much. Keep each individual sequence to 2, 3, 4 slides, and then let them sit and then let them expire. If you keep adding more and more and more before the first ones expire, or you post 8 slides at once, you'll probably see quite a high drop off in between. People won't get through all of them. And the third thing is the same as any content really. Make it good. Make your stories worth watching and engaging with. If you spend 2 story slides chatting about your morning without adding subtitles, so many people won't make it to slide 3, which is where the gold is. That's the one that you really wanted people to see with the link to your offer. If you've hidden it behind a wall of you talking nonsense, people aren't going to see it. So tell stories. Do what it says on the tin. Tell stories on your stories. See that as a place to really connect with your audiences and open up a bit of a two-way conversation rather than just speaking at people. And also add opportunities for feedback. Polls, stickers, all those kind of things. I mentioned a second ago that the more that you engage with someone, the earlier you'll see them in your circles. Obviously, that works both ways. So you want to get within the first few of other people's little circles. And if the way for you to do that is you're engaging with other people and that's how they appear, then you need to provide opportunities for people to engage with you. Does that make sense? Stories can be super candid and raw and real, but as with everything, as a business on social media, you will always get the best results when you approach it with strategy. And on that note, let's get stuck into today's topic, which is the difference between a social media manager and a social media strategist, and kind of what to expect when you are working with one or either of those. This is actually quite interesting timing for me recording this as well, because it's almost exactly a year ago that I sort of changed my job title, as it were, from social media manager to social media strategist, and really stepped into that being my role for the first time. I don't think I ever felt confident in using the title strategist before that, even though there was definitely overlap in what I was doing. Also, I think there's overlap in what people are looking for when they are hiring a social media manager or strategist. You may be thinking about hiring a social media manager right now, and maybe after listening to this episode, actually, you realise that you're looking for a strategist. But one difference that I think is potentially the most important one, and one that I don't think people are talking about or emphasising enough, is what's the measure of success? So a social media manager will likely focus on ensuring that you have 3 posts a week, 5 posts a week, whatever it is that their clients are paying for. Their focus will be on ensuring that that content is up on that grid, getting the consistency, and creating content based off their clients' blog posts, past content. The focus really being on that content and then how it performs. So likes, reach, followers. Whereas a strategist is a bit more big picture. So yes, you'll still likely see that same package style, so 3 posts a week, 5 posts a week, but that content isn't just kind of being created for the sake of being created and for generating views. It's created to reach wider goals. So your business goals are at the center of everything, and your strategist looks at those goals and says, right, how do we leverage your social media to help you achieve those? And I almost think a social media manager could run an account with very little input from the client if the focus is purely on creating good on-brand content. But the strategist needs that collaboration. Not in a way that means that a strategist needs hand-holding, but because they're actually much more interested in the stuff that they can't see on Instagram. It's less about the likes and the follow count and more about what's happening behind the scenes, which often we don't get to see unless you share it with us, unless our clients share it with us. And that input is really needed from you to understand your wider business goals so that your content aligns to it and your content isn't just its own little island sat doing its own thing. If your business actually runs pretty well off social media, for example, I know a lot of wedding suppliers who they don't massively rely on social media because they get so many referrals through word of mouth or being venues recommended suppliers, for example, and are actually just kind of happy keeping their socials more of a portfolio and keep it ticking over so that it's active for when couples do go looking for them. I think a social media manager can cover that remit very well. Equally, if you are confident setting the strategy and you just need or want someone to execute, so someone to create the reels, do the posting, to me, that's a social media manager as well. Potentially even a creative virtual assistant, but that is possibly controversial to say. If you're looking for someone to lead on the strategy, to have a chat with you about what you want to achieve, tell them about your upcoming launch, and then let them take the lead on how that looks on socials, that's a strategist. There is no right answer necessarily on which one you go for. It will really depend on what you want from your social media, what your expectations are, and also what works for you in your business. Some business owners want a whole lot of input, and actually they might be better off with a manager to execute and be happy just to kind of keep things moving. I really noticed that for me, that name change, the job title switch, happened when I no longer felt that that was enough for me. I didn't want to just execute a strategy given to me by someone else anymore. I didn't want to just design and post. I had a lot more knowledge to share. I felt that I had more to give, and I could maybe see gaps or things that I thought would be more impactful if I had the capacity, if I was being empowered to suggest alternatives. Now, I do think that you absolutely need to trust the people you hire, whatever that role is. It's a waste of your time to hire someone and completely micromanage, in my opinion. But I do think that maybe if you want a little bit more control, then that's where a social media manager or social media assistant role might work better for you. And sometimes it's actually just a case of whether you opt for freelance or bringing someone in-house. I have seen that too, where actually they might have been better off bringing someone in-house because their expectations were very sort of last-minute changes and being much more available to them. And I think whether you are a social media manager or a social media strategist, if you are freelance, that doesn't always work because you are managing multiple clients at once. Whereas if they had brought that role in-house, then they could kind of define what the expectations and boundaries were a little bit more clearly, and they had a bit more control over that. And if I'm honest, I do think there is confusion across the industry too about what the differences are and what you can expect from working with either one. The lines are blurry. Everyone has different definitions, different boundaries, different processes. So this episode is very much my take on the differences and what those roles mean to me based on my perception and experiences. Because I was a bit unsure which camp I fell into literally a year ago. So it's not the most simple this versus that industry. My biggest piece of advice would be, if you're approaching someone to work with for your business, then ask all the questions. Find out if they are experts in the platforms that you're most interested in. So for example, right now I would say that Instagram is very much my jam. That's where I feel my expertise most lie. If someone came to me looking for advice or strategy for X, Twitter, that wouldn't be for me. I don't even have that app downloaded on my phone anymore. So I'm not the social media gal for you if that's the platform you're looking at. But if someone's coming to me to work on Instagram, then I'm much better suited to that client. Also, potentially even what industries that they most like working with. I know some incredible social media managers who are absolute experts in the aesthetics industry. So lash technicians, nail technicians, brows, and they exclusively work with aesthetic practitioners. Some social media gals don't niche down into one specific industry. I don't currently have a specific industry niche, although I am definitely leaning more towards sort of online communities and memberships at the moment. I don't have an exact niche right now, but I do think that is a good question to consider and have a chat with the individual about. Normally, if they do have a very specific niche, that will become quite clear in their content before you even have that chat with them, but just something to think about. And also what their expectations are going to be of you and what they'll need from you versus what they see as their responsibilities. So for example, I will always have a vibe check call with management inquiries because I want to ensure that we're on the same page before we jump into proposals and contracts. I want to make it clear that there are some expectations of what I need from my clients. Like I was saying before, I need to know what their business goals are and make sure that they're clear on where they're heading in their business and they've got a pretty good idea of who their target audience are. Because for me, I want to be able to create content with real intention and real purpose, and not just for the sake of growing followers or which content can get the most likes. I'm much more interested in bigger picture, what it looks like for them behind the scenes. And to do that, it's a bit of a collaboration. I need to know the business goals, but also usually as well, there is a demand for content. And I think that does come for both social media managers and strategists. But as I was saying before, managers can sometimes create things based off past content or graphics based on blog posts and that sort of thing. Whereas I personally think that some of the best performing content requires a bit more input from my clients. So they might have to film things or, send in selfies and things that kind of help that content feel a lot more authentic to them rather than graphics. I do feel like pure graphics are dying out now in a lot of industries. But all of these things are just questions to ask, discussions to have if you're thinking about working with someone in the social media space, whether that's a manager, whether that's a strategist. I think it's important that you ask all these questions and kind of understand what each other's expectations are, because as much as if you are getting a freelancer, often they will have their own processes and boundaries. I know I'm quite strict with what my ways of working are. It's also important for clients to have what they need as well. So I've worked before with clients who, as I already mentioned, maybe needed slightly different ways of working. They needed on-demand communication and really last-minute changes to things because that's how they planned for their business. But that was never going to work for me. So in the end, that was just a clash of ways of working and it didn't quite work out. Some social media teams will also have their own sort of area of expertise. So for an example, there's an agency who focus on virality and that's their speciality. If you want thousands and thousands of views, go to them. Others focus on follower growth. Other strategists might be launching or funnel experts. As I said, for me right now, it's Instagram and supporting businesses who have a community-based mission and memberships. And that might change. So if you're not listening to this episode in real time, it'll be interesting to listen back to that in another 12 months. I hope this episode has given you some insights into the differences from an inside the industry perspective, from someone who has had both of those job titles, and kind of what I see as the main differences. And I definitely don't see one as better than the other. It really comes down to expectations and, as I said, defining outcomes and the skill set that you need to reach that outcome. And it's also worth saying that outsourcing to a social media manager or strategist isn't about being rubbish at social media or even not enjoying it. It's simply a matter of priorities. I've had clients before that are actually really good at their own social media. They just maybe haven't been as consistent as they wanted to be. Or I've worked with one client who actually started out as a social media manager and is now an ads expert. I've worked with brand designers who are more than capable of designing their own content, but it no longer needed to be them. And so they outsourced to free up brain space to do the really exciting things in their business and step into more of a CEO role. I even do it now with my own team. I haven't edited any of my own content for ages. Not because I can't. Obviously, I can do that. I've been doing it myself for years, but I don't need to, which gives me the time to record this podcast and do other things. So really, what this episode is all about is asking for the right support for you and knowing that it's the time to ask for help and finding that right match for where you're at and what you want. So today's cheesy quote for the episode is possibly the cheesiest one yet. So if you've listened to the first 8 episodes, strap in. We're going for it. Teamwork divides the tasks and multiplies the success. That really is the stinky blue cheese of cheesy quotes, isn't it? But it's catchy and it's true. So enjoy it. And I'm going to say it again. teamwork divides the tasks and multiplies the success. And with that, have a gorgeous, cheesy rest of your week, and I will catch you again next Wednesday. Bye! If you're new to the podcast, or maybe you just haven't done it yet, please do hit that subscribe button wherever you're listening. And if you can, also leave a review or rate. It really helps the podcast to grow. And let me know if you're listening as well and which episode has been your favourite. It's always so nice to hear feedback on the episodes. And honestly, if you do that, you really are one of my favourite humans. So thank you so much, and I'll see you next week.